The first drops of rain splattered against the dirt road as Lillian O'Malley clutched her father's letter in trembling hands. It was 1875 in the harsh Montana territory, and her world had just crumbled beneath her feet. Her mother's inheritance, the only thing that might save her from destitution, was being claimed by the very man who had abandoned them years ago. "Miss O'Malley," the stagecoach driver called from above, "we'll be reaching Silver Creek in 5 minutes. Best gather your belongings." Lillian folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her reticule. At 22, she had grown accustomed to handling difficult situations alone. After her mother's passing 3 months prior, she had discovered the documents detailing her maternal grandmother's substantial dowry property and investments, worth over $5,000 that had been set aside in trust for Lillian upon her 23rd birthday, which was mere weeks away. But now her father, Duncan O'Malley, a man she barely remembered, had somehow learned of the inheritance and sent word that he was claiming it as the rightful husband of Lillian's late mother. The letter informed her that he had already begun legal proceedings in Silver Creek, where her grandmother's property was registered. As the stagecoach rolled into the dusty main street of Silver Creek, Lillian straightened her simple blue traveling dress and adjusted her bonnet. The town was larger than she had expected, a proper settlement with wooden sidewalks, a general store, 2 saloons, and even a small courthouse. The rain was falling steadily now, turning the unpaved street into a muddy quagmire. "Need help with your trunk, miss?" The driver asked as the coach came to a halt. "Yes, thank you. Could you direct me to Halliday's boarding house?" The driver pointed down the street. 2 blocks that way, white building with green shutters, can't miss it." Lillian stepped down carefully into the mud, grimacing as it splashed her hem. With her small satchel in one hand and her umbrella in the other, she waited as the driver unloaded her trunk onto the boardwalk. "I can help you with that." The deep voice came from behind her, and Lillian turned to find herself looking up at a tall man in a worn duster. His hat was pulled low against the rain, but she could see a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. When he tilted his head, kind hazel eyes met hers. "I'm headed that way myself," he said, gesturing toward the boarding house. Lillian hesitated. Her mother had always cautioned her about trusting strangers, especially in frontier towns, but the trunk was heavy and the rain was intensifying. "I would appreciate the assistance, thank you," she finally said. The man hoisted her trunk onto his shoulder with surprising ease. "Lucas Irving," he introduced himself as they began walking, "just passing through town on some business." "Lillian O'Malley," she replied. "I'm here on family matters." Lucas nodded but didn't press for details, which Lillian appreciated. They walked in silence for a moment, the only sounds the rainfall and the squelch of boots in mud. "First time in Silver Creek?" he asked. "Yes, I'm from Denver originally. Denver's a fine city." "Growing fast these days." They reached the boarding house, a neat 2-story structure with a small porch. Lucas set her trunk down and tipped his hat. "Thank you, Mr. Irving," Lillian said sincerely. "Just Lucas is fine. Good luck with your family matters, Miss O'Malley." As he turned to leave, Lillian was struck by an impulse. "Mr. Irving, Lucas, do you happen to know where I might find Judge Wilson's office? I need to see him tomorrow on an urgent matter." Lucas studied her for a moment. "The courthouse is at the end of Main Street. Judge holds sessions Tuesday and Thursday mornings." He paused. "If you're in some kind of trouble, Miss O'Malley, Silver Creek has a few good people who might help." "It's a legal matter regarding my inheritance," Lillian said, then wondered why she was confiding in this stranger. "My father is attempting to claim what rightfully belongs to me." Something flickered in Lucas's eyes, recognition perhaps, or concern. "Judge Wilson is fair, but he's also old-fashioned. Doesn't always side with women in property disputes, especially against their fathers or husbands." He seemed to consider something before adding, "I know a bit about the law if you need any assistance." Lillian smiled politely. "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose. Good day, Mr. Irving." Inside the boarding house, Mrs. Halliday, a plump, cheerful widow in her 50s, showed Lillian to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. After washing up and changing into a dry dress, Lillian sat on the narrow bed and reread her father's letter. "You've no right to Margaret's money," it read in a sharp, angular hand. "A daughter does not inherit before her father. I've filed papers with Judge Wilson and expect the matter to be settled promptly. If you wish to contest, you may appear before the judge on Thursday next." Lillian had never expected to see her father again after he'd abandoned them 15 years ago. Her mother had rarely spoken of him, except to say that Duncan O'Malley had a weakness for cards and whiskey. Now here he was, materializing from the past to steal what little security Lillian had left. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Supper's ready, dear," Mrs. Halliday called. "Come down while it's hot." The boarding house dining room held a long table where several guests were already seated. Mrs. Halliday introduced Lillian to a traveling salesman, an elderly couple visiting their son, and to her surprise, Lucas Irving. "We meet again," he said with a slight smile as she took the chair across from him. Over a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, the conversation flowed easily around the table. The salesman regaled them with tales from his travels, while the elderly couple proudly described their son's successful cattle ranch outside of town. "And what brings you to Silver Creek, Miss O'Malley?" the salesman eventually asked. Before Lillian could formulate a vague response, Lucas spoke up. "Miss O'Malley is here to see the judge about a property matter." His eyes met hers briefly. "Silver Creek is becoming quite the place for legal disputes these days." "Oh yes," Mrs. Halliday chimed in. "Why, just yesterday another gentleman checked in who's also seeing the judge. Mr. O'Malley, I believe." She looked at Lillian. "Any relation to you, dear?" Lillian nearly choked on her stew. He's my father." The table fell silent. Mrs. Halliday looked embarrassed. "Oh my, I didn't realize. He's in room 4, just down the hall from you." The knowledge that her father was under the same roof sent a chill through Lillian. She excused herself shortly after, claiming fatigue from her journey. As she reached the stairs, Lucas caught up with her. "Miss O'Malley, a moment, please." She turned, suddenly wary. "I couldn't help overhearing," he said quietly, "about your father." "It's a private matter," she replied stiffly. "Of course." He hesitated. "It's just, I know Duncan O'Malley." Lillian's eyes widened. "You know my father? How? I've played cards with him in Cheyenne a time or two. He has a reputation." Lucas seemed to choose his words carefully. "If he's contesting your inheritance, you might need more help than you realize." "Are you offering your services, Mr. Irving? What exactly is your profession?" "I'm a rancher by trade," he said, "but I studied law for a time in St. Louis before heading west. Never took the bar, but I know enough to recognize when someone's trying to manipulate the system." Lillian studied him. His clothes were simple but well made, his manner straightforward. He didn't have the slick confidence of a con man, but she had learned long ago not to trust first impressions. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." A shadow crossed his face. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people lose what's rightfully theirs because they didn't have anyone to stand beside them in court." Lillian considered her options. She had planned to simply show the judge her grandmother's will and her mother's letters, assuming the truth would be self-evident. But if her father had already been working on the judge, what would this help entail exactly? She asked. "Let me look at your documents," Lucas said. "I might see something you've missed or know what kind of argument your father is likely to make." Lillian hesitated. "I'll consider it. Good night, Mr. Irving." She climbed the stairs, her mind whirling. The situation was becoming more complicated by the hour. And now to learn her father was staying in this very house, perhaps even now plotting how to steal her inheritance, made her stomach knot with anxiety. Back in her room, Lillian opened her trunk and removed a small wooden box containing her mother's papers. There was the original document establishing her grandmother's dowry trust, several letters between her mother and grandmother discussing the inheritance, and her mother's own will leaving everything to Lillian. She had read them dozens of times, but now she wondered if they would be enough. The next morning, Lillian rose early, hoping to avoid an encounter with her father. She dressed carefully in her best dark green day dress, pinned her honey blonde hair into a neat chignon, and gathered her documents. As she passed room 4, she slowed, staring at the closed door. What would she even say to the man who had abandoned her and her mother? The man whose drinking and gambling had forced them to live in near poverty until her mother's sewing skills had gradually built them a modest but respectable life. She hurried past and down the stairs. In the dining room, Lucas was already at the table nursing a cup of coffee. He stood when she entered. "Good morning, Miss O'Malley. I trust you slept well." "As well as can be expected," she replied, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Halliday. "I've decided to take you up on your offer, Mr. Irving. I would appreciate your insights on my case." Relief flickered across his face. "I'm glad to hear it. After breakfast, perhaps." They spoke little during the meal, but afterward, Lucas suggested they walk to the small park near the courthouse where they could speak privately. The morning was clear and crisp after the previous day's rain, the mountain air fresh and invigorating. Once seated on a bench beneath a tall pine, Lillian showed Lucas her documents. He read them carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Your grandmother was a wise woman," he said finally. "The trust is clearly established in your name, to be transferred upon your 23rd birthday or your mother's passing, whichever came later. Then you think my case is strong, it should be, but..." Lucas frowned. "The law still gives husbands certain rights over their wives' property, even after death. If your father can convince the judge that he never legally relinquished his claim as your mother's husband, he might be able to assert rights over her estate, including this inheritance." Lillian's heart sank. "But he abandoned us. Surely that counts for something?" "It should, but did your mother ever officially file for divorce?" "No," Lillian admitted. "She always said she didn't need a piece of paper to know she was free of him." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "We need to establish that your father forfeited his rights by abandonment. Do you have any evidence of when he left? Letters, perhaps, or witnesses who could testify?" "My mother's friend, Mrs. Pembroke, knew the situation well. She's in Denver, though." "We could telegraph her for a sworn statement," Lucas suggested. "But we need more. How did your father find out about the inheritance?" Lillian shook her head. "I have no idea. Mother never spoke of it to anyone but me." Lucas was about to respond when a shadow fell across them. Lillian looked up and felt her blood run cold. A tall man with graying red hair and a thick mustache stood before them, his green eyes so like her own regarding her with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying the faint lilt of his Irish heritage. "If it isn't my darling daughter all grown up." Lillian stood slowly, her papers clutched tightly against her chest. "Father," Duncan O'Malley's gaze shifted to Lucas, who had also risen. "And who might you be, young man?" "Lucas Irving," he replied evenly. "A friend of Miss O'Malley's." "Is that so?" Duncan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Interesting friends you keep, Lillian. I wonder if you know who you're dealing with." Lucas remained impassive. "Miss O'Malley and I were just discussing her inheritance case." "Ah, yes, the case." Duncan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A simple misunderstanding, really. As Margaret's husband, I'm merely claiming what's legally mine." "It was my grandmother's money," Lillian said, finding her voice, "left specifically to me." "Through your mother, who was my wife," Duncan countered smoothly. "The law is quite clear on the matter." "The law also recognizes abandonment," Lucas interjected. 15 years without support or contact might weigh heavily with Judge Wilson." Duncan's smile faltered briefly. "I see my daughter has hired herself a legal advisor. How touching." He turned back to Lillian. "We should talk privately, my dear, family matters and all that." "I have nothing to say to you," Lillian replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll see you in court, Mr. O'Malley." Duncan's face hardened. "Very well, but remember, I tried to be reasonable." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day to you both." As he walked away, Lillian sank back onto the bench, her legs suddenly weak. "Are you all right?" Lucas asked, sitting beside her. "I haven't seen him since I was 7 years old," she whispered. "I barely remembered his face." Lucas placed a gentle hand on her arm. "He's trying to intimidate you. Men like him count on people backing down." "What did he mean about me not knowing who I'm dealing with? Does he know something about you?" Lucas looked away. "Your father and I have history, but that's not important right now. What matters is building your case." He paused, There's something else we need to consider. Your father mentioned the hearing is tomorrow, but have you received an official summons from the court? Lillian shook her head. Only his letter. That's troubling. He may have been trying to catch you unprepared, hoping you wouldn't show up so he could win by default. Lucas stood. We should go to the courthouse now and check the docket, make sure everything is in order. The Silver Creek Courthouse was a substantial brick building, imposing compared to the wooden structures surrounding it. Inside, they found the clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, organizing papers at his desk. "Excuse me," Lucas said. "We'd like to inquire about a case before Judge Wilson tomorrow, O'Malley versus O'Malley, regarding an inheritance dispute." The clerk adjusted his spectacles and consulted a ledger. "Yes, scheduled for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Mr. Duncan O'Malley petitioning for rights to the Margaret O'Malley estate, including the Eleanor Blackburn Trust." "Has a summons been issued to Lillian O'Malley?" Lucas asked. The clerk flipped through some papers. "I see no record of an official summons being served." Lucas and Lillian exchanged glances. "We'd like to file a formal appearance for Miss O'Malley as defendant in this case," Lucas said. "Are you her legal representative, sir?" the clerk asked. "No, just assisting. Miss O'Malley will represent herself." After completing the necessary paperwork, they stepped back outside. "Your father was trying to get a judgment without you even being there," Lucas said grimly. "It's a common tactic in these cases." "What do we do now?" Lillian asked, feeling overwhelmed. "We need to gather more evidence and prepare your testimony." Lucas looked thoughtful. "I know someone who might help us. The land office manager, Mr. Hollister, has records going back decades. He might have information about your grandmother's property and how it was registered." The land office was a small building near the bank. Mr. Hollister, a balding man with an impressive beard, greeted them warmly. "Miss O'Malley, what a pleasure to meet Eleanor Blackburn's granddaughter. I knew your grandmother well. She was one of the first women to own property outright in this county." Lillian was surprised. "You knew my grandmother?" "Indeed I did. Formidable woman. Came west with her husband in 42, and when he passed in 49, she took over their trading post and ran it better than he ever did." Hollister chuckled. "Folks said she drove a harder bargain than any man in the territory." "Mr. Hollister," Lucas interjected, "we're trying to establish the clear line of inheritance for Eleanor Blackburn's trust, specifically the $5,000 in property she set aside for her granddaughter." Hollister nodded. "I remember that trust well. Mrs. Blackburn was very specific about it, wanted to make sure her daughter's husband couldn't touch it." Lillian felt a surge of hope. "She specifically mentioned my father. Not by name, but she made it clear the money was to go directly to you, bypassing both your mother and any claim your mother's husband might make." Hollister rummaged through a cabinet. "I should have the original declaration somewhere. Ah, here we are." He produced a yellowed document and laid it on his desk. Lillian and Lucas leaned forward to read it. "I, Eleanor Blackburn, being of sound mind, do hereby establish this trust for the sole benefit of my granddaughter, Lillian Margaret O'Malley, to be administered separately from any marital property of my daughter, Margaret Blackburn O'Malley, and to be protected from any claim by Margaret's husband or any other party." "This is exactly what we need," Lucas said excitedly. "May we have a copy of this document, Mr. Hollister?" "Better than that," Hollister replied. "I'll come to court myself tomorrow and bring the original. I was there when Mrs. Blackburn signed it. I can testify to her intentions." As they left the land office, Lillian felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. That was incredibly fortunate. "It's a good start," Lucas agreed, "but we still need to prepare for your father's arguments. He'll likely claim that as your mother's husband, he has legal right to administer all property that would have come to her, including your inheritance." They spent the afternoon in the park, carefully reviewing all the documents and planning Lillian's testimony. Lucas was thorough, anticipating Duncan's potential arguments and helping Lillian craft her responses. "Remember," he advised, "stay calm, speak clearly, and don't let your father provoke you. Judge Wilson respects composure." As the sun began to set, they walked back toward the boarding house. The evening air was turning cool, and Lillian pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Thank you for your help today," she said. "I don't know what I would have done without your guidance." Lucas smiled, the fading sunlight catching the gold flecks in his hazel eyes. "You're stronger than you realize, Miss O'Malley. You would have found a way. May I ask you something personal, Mr. Irving?" "Of course." "What did my father mean when he suggested I don't know who I'm dealing with? What history do you share with him?" Lucas was quiet for a moment. 3 years ago, I was working as a foreman at the Double T Ranch near Cheyenne. Your father was hired as a hand, but it quickly became clear he was more interested in cards than cattle. He convinced the owner's son to join some high-stakes games." Lucas's jaw tightened. "The boy lost heavily money that wasn't his to lose. When his father found out, your father claimed I was the one who encouraged the gambling. And you were blamed. I was fired, lost my reputation in the area, had to start over." Lucas shrugged. "I built my own small ranch up north, but I never forgot how easily he lied, how convincingly." "I'm sorry," Lillian said softly. "It's in the past. But it's why I wanted to help when I realized who you were up against. Your father is persuasive when he wants something." They had reached the boarding house. Through the window, they could see several guests gathered in the parlor, including Duncan O'Malley, who was regaling them with some story, gesturing expansively. "I think I'll take supper in my room tonight," Lillian said. "A wise decision." "We both need rest before tomorrow." Lucas hesitated. "Miss O'Malley, Lillian, whatever happens in court, I want you to know I believe in your case. Your grandmother clearly intended this inheritance for you alone." His sincerity touched her. "Thank you, Lucas, for everything." Inside, Lillian asked Mrs. Halliday to bring a tray to her room, then hurried upstairs, avoiding the parlor. She spent the evening reviewing her documents once more and trying to calm her nerves. Tomorrow would determine her future, whether she would have the means to start a new life or whether she would be left with nothing. She was awakened in the middle of the night by voices in the hallway, one of them her father's, slurred with drink. "'S not right," he was saying loudly. "My own flesh and blood turning against me, after all I've sacrificed." "Keep your voice down, Mr. O'Malley," came Mrs. Halliday's stern reply. "You'll wake the other guests." "Don't tell me what to do, woman. I'm Duncan O'Malley. I've bested card sharks from St. Louis to San Francisco. Think I can't handle a slip of a girl and that meddling cowboy?" Their voices faded as Mrs. Halliday presumably guided him to his room. Lillian lay awake for a long time afterward, her father's words echoing in her mind. He saw this as a game one he was confident of winning. Morning came too quickly. Lillian dressed in her most formal attire, a navy blue dress with a high collar and modest bustle. She arranged her hair simply but neatly and packed her documents carefully in her mother's leather portfolio. When she descended to the dining room, Lucas was waiting, dressed in a clean black suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to respectable gentleman. He stood as she entered. "You look ready for battle," he said with an encouraging smile. "I feel more like running away," she admitted. "But my mother didn't raise a coward." They ate a light breakfast, neither of them speaking much. There was no sign of Duncan, for which Lillian was grateful. The courthouse was already busy when they arrived. Various townspeople were gathered for the day's proceedings, along with several lawyers in formal attire. Lucas guided Lillian to a bench near the front, and they waited as Judge Wilson, a stern-looking man with a thick white beard, took his seat at the bench. "First case," called the clerk. "O'Malley versus O'Malley, inheritance dispute." Lillian rose on shaky legs and moved forward. To her right, Duncan approached as well, looking remarkably sober and respectable in a dark suit. He was accompanied by a sharp-featured man whom the clerk introduced as Mr. Pearson, attorney at law. Judge Wilson looked over his spectacles at the parties before him. "I understand this is a dispute over the estate of Margaret O'Malley, specifically regarding a trust established by Eleanor Blackburn." "Yes, Your Honor," said Mr. Pearson smoothly. "My client, as the lawful husband of the late Margaret O'Malley, is petitioning for his rightful control over all assets of his wife's estate, including the trust in question." "And you, young lady," the judge asked, turning to Lillian, "are you represented by counsel?" "No, Your Honor." I am representing myself, though Mr. Irving has kindly assisted me in preparing my case. The judge nodded. Very well, Mr. Pearson, you may present your client's case. Pearson stepped forward with practiced confidence. Your Honor, the law is clear on this matter. A husband has legal right to administer his wife's property. Mrs. O'Malley's passing does not change this fundamental legal principle. The trust established by Mrs. Blackburn, while intended for her granddaughter, legally passed through Mrs. O'Malley first. As such, Mr. O'Malley, as the surviving spouse, has legal claim to administer these assets. He presented several legal documents, which the judge examined carefully. Lillian felt her confidence wavering as Pearson cited various legal precedents supporting his argument. Furthermore, Pearson continued, Mr. O'Malley has been separated from his family due to the necessity of finding work in various territories. His absence was not abandonment but the sacrifice of a father seeking to provide for his family from afar. Lillian nearly gasped at this blatant lie, but Lucas placed a cautioning hand on her arm. Thank you, Mr. Pearson, the judge said. Miss O'Malley, you may present your case now. Lillian stepped forward, her heart pounding. Your Honor, I have brought several documents that clearly demonstrate my grandmother's intentions. She presented her papers, including her grandmother's will and the trust document. As you can see, my grandmother explicitly established this trust to bypass my mother and to be protected from any claim by my mother's husband. The judge examined the papers. These appear to be in order, but Mr. Pearson's legal argument regarding a husband's rights is compelling. Your Honor, Lillian continued, I would like to call Mr. Hollister from the land office, who can testify to my grandmother's intentions. Hollister was sworn in and confirmed everything he had told them the day before, presenting the original declaration of trust. The judge seemed impressed by this evidence. Additionally, Lillian said, finding her voice growing stronger, I must address Mr. Pearson's claim that my father was absent due to seeking work. The truth is that Duncan O'Malley abandoned my mother and me when I was 7 years old. He provided no support, sent no letters, and made no attempt to contact us for 15 years. That's a lie, Duncan interjected. I sent money whenever I could. Do you have any proof of these remittances, Mr. O'Malley? The judge asked. Duncan hesitated. Times were hard. I couldn't always keep records. I have my mother's household accounts, Lillian countered, producing a small leather-bound book. She recorded every penny that came into our home. There is no record of any contribution from Duncan O'Malley after April 4, 1860, the day he left. The judge examined the book carefully. This seems to support your claim of abandonment, Miss O'Malley. Pearson stepped forward again. Your Honor, regardless of past history, the legal principle remains. As Mrs. O'Malley's husband, my client has rights to her property, including administration of any trusts that would have passed through her. The judge looked thoughtful. This is indeed a complex case. The legal principle Mr. Pearson cites is well established, yet the specific language of Mrs. Blackburn's trust raises questions about its applicability here. Lillian felt her hope fading. Despite all their preparation, it seemed the judge was leaning toward the established legal precedent. She glanced at Lucas, who was watching the proceedings intently, his brow furrowed. Suddenly he stood. Your Honor, if I may address the court. The judge looked surprised but nodded. You may speak, Mr. Irving, though I remind you that you are not counsel in this case. I understand, Your Honor. I simply wish to present a document that may be relevant to these proceedings. Lucas approached the bench and placed a folded paper before the judge. This is a copy of a legal notice published in the Cheyenne Eagle on May 15, 1860. It shows that Margaret O'Malley publicly declared herself abandoned and assumed sole responsibility for all financial and legal matters pertaining to herself and her daughter. The judge unfolded the paper and read it carefully. Lillian stared at Lucas in astonishment. He had never mentioned this document. This appears to be an official legal notice, the judge said. Mr. Pearson, was your client aware of this declaration? Duncan looked stricken. Pearson quickly recovered. Your Honor, my client was traveling extensively during this period. He could not have been expected to monitor newspaper notices in every territory. Perhaps not, the judge agreed. But this notice, combined with the specific language of Mrs. Blackburn's trust and the evidence of abandonment, presents a compelling case that Mr. O'Malley forfeited his marital rights regarding this specific inheritance. Hope surged within Lillian. Lucas caught her eye and gave her a small, encouraging nod. "There is one more matter," Lucas said, producing another document. "I have here a sworn affidavit from Sheriff Thomas Burke of Cheyenne, stating that Duncan O'Malley was arrested for fraud in the summer of 1860, shortly after leaving his family. He was charged with selling mining shares in a non-existent silver mine." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Duncan's face turned crimson. "That case was dismissed," he shouted. "Because the witnesses disappeared under mysterious circumstances," Lucas countered calmly. "The affidavit notes that although the charges were dropped, Mr. O'Malley was strongly encouraged to leave the territory." Judge Wilson banged his gavel. "Order. Mr. Irving, while this information speaks to Mr. O'Malley's character, it is not directly relevant to the inheritance dispute." "With respect, Your Honor," Lucas replied, "it establishes a pattern of fraudulent behavior and supports Miss O'Malley's contention that her father abandoned his family not to seek honest work, but to escape legal consequences." The judge considered this for a moment. "I will take all evidence into consideration. This court will recess for 30 minutes while I review the documents." As the judge retired to his chambers, Lillian turned to Lucas. "Where did you get those papers? You never mentioned them." "I sent a telegraph to a friend in Cheyenne yesterday afternoon," he explained quietly. "I wasn't sure if the documents would arrive in time, so I didn't want to raise your hopes." Across the aisle, Duncan was engaged in a heated, whispered conversation with Pearson. He shot venomous glances in their direction. "He looks furious," Lillian observed. "He's realizing his scheme is falling apart," Lucas replied. "Men like your father depend on intimidation and the assumption that no one will challenge them." The 30 minutes felt like hours, but finally, Judge Wilson returned to the bench. The courtroom fell silent as he settled into his chair and arranged his papers. "Having reviewed all evidence presented in the case of O'Malley versus O'Malley, I am prepared to render my decision." He looked over his spectacles at Duncan. "Mr. O'Malley, while the law generally supports a husband's right to administer his wife's property, those rights can be forfeited through abandonment. The evidence clearly shows that you abandoned your family for 15 years, providing no support or communication." Duncan started to protest, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Furthermore, Mrs. Blackburn's trust was specifically structured to bypass her daughter and protect the inheritance from any claim by her daughter's husband. The language is explicit and legally sound. The judge turned to Lillian. "Miss O'Malley, upon reviewing all documents, I find that the trust established by your grandmother is indeed solely for your benefit, free from any claim by your father." Relief washed over Lillian. She reached for Lucas's hand without thinking, and he squeezed it gently. "I therefore rule that the Eleanor Blackburn Trust, including all monies and properties therein, is to be transferred to Lillian O'Malley in full on her 23rd birthday, as stipulated in the original trust document." Case dismissed. The bang of the gavel seemed to echo through Lillian's entire body. She had won. The inheritance, her future, was secure. Duncan stormed out of the courtroom, Pearson hurrying after him. Mr. Hollister approached to congratulate Lillian, as did several townspeople who had been watching the proceedings. "Thank you, Mr. Hollister," Lillian said warmly. "Your testimony was invaluable." "It was my pleasure, Miss O'Malley. Your grandmother would be proud." When the well-wishers had dispersed, Lillian turned to Lucas. "I don't know how to thank you without those documents. You had a strong case already," he assured her. "The trust document was very clear. I just provided a little additional evidence." They stepped outside into the bright midday sunshine. The street was busy with townsfolk going about their business, unaware of how Lillian's life had just been transformed. "What will you do now?" Lucas asked as they walked slowly toward the boarding house. I'm not entirely sure, Lillian admitted. Returned to Denver initially, I suppose, to settle my mother's affairs. After that, she hesitated. I've always dreamed of opening a bookshop. Denver is growing rapidly, and there's a need for more businesses catering to women and families. That sounds like a fine plan, Lucas said. You have a good head for business from what I've seen. What about you? You mentioned a ranch up north, a small spread near the Big Horn Mountains. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. I've been building it up slowly. They had reached the boarding house. Lillian paused on the porch steps, turning to face him. Lucas, I truly can't thank you enough. You've changed my life. You did that yourself, Lillian. You stood up to your father and fought for what was rightfully yours. That takes courage. Their eyes met, and Lillian felt something shift between them, a warmth, a connection that had been building since that rainy afternoon when he'd first offered to carry her trunk. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Halliday opening the door. There you are. I've been wondering how the court case went. Miss O'Malley won, Lucas said, his eyes still on Lillian's face. The judge ruled entirely in her favor. Wonderful news, Mrs. Halliday beamed. And you should know, Miss O'Malley, that your father checked out while you were at court. Paid his bill and left town on the noon stage. Lillian felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Good, I hope I never see him again. Inside, Lillian found a note had been slipped under her door. The handwriting was angular and familiar. You won this round, daughter. Enjoy your victory. But remember, the West is a small place. Our paths may cross again. D.O. She crumpled the note and tossed it into the fire burning in the small grate. Her father's threats meant nothing now. She had her inheritance, her freedom, and her future ahead of her. That evening, Lucas invited Lillian to dinner at the town's best restaurant, a modest establishment called the Silver Spoon that nonetheless served excellent beefsteak and fresh bread. They celebrated her victory with a bottle of wine, and for the first time in months, Lillian felt truly happy. When do you plan to leave Silver Creek? Lucas asked as they lingered over coffee. I thought I'd take the eastbound stage tomorrow, Lillian replied. There's nothing keeping me here now that the case is settled. Lucas nodded, but she thought she detected disappointment in his eyes. That makes sense. Denver awaits, and you back to your ranch eventually. I have some business to finish here first. He hesitated. Lillian, I was wondering, that is, I thought perhaps. She had never seen him at a loss for words before. Yes. I'll be in Denver next month to buy some breeding stock. Perhaps I could call on you then. Warmth bloomed in Lillian's chest. I'd like that very much. Their eyes met across the table, and this time there was no mistaking the connection between them, a spark of something new and full of promise. The next morning, Lucas accompanied Lillian to the stagecoach. Her trunk was loaded, her ticket purchased, and only the goodbyes remained. Thank you again for everything, she said, suddenly shy. I don't know what would have happened without your help. You'd have managed, he said with a smile, but I'm glad I could be there. He took her hand gently. I'll see you in Denver, Lillian O'Malley. I'll be waiting, Lucas Irving. As the stagecoach pulled away, Lillian looked back at Lucas standing in the street, his tall figure growing smaller with distance. She felt a curious mixture of sadness at leaving him and excitement for what might come next. The journey to Denver passed quickly, her mind filled with plans for her future and thoughts of the quiet, steadfast man who had stood beside her when she needed it most. Upon her return, Lillian settled back into her mother's small house and began putting her affairs in order. She visited her mother's grave, laying fresh flowers and telling her about the court case and how her inheritance had been secured. And I met someone, Mother, she whispered. A good man, I think you would approve. The weeks passed swiftly. Lillian used a small advance from her trust to lease a storefront on a promising street not far from the growing business district. She ordered inventory, shelves, and a beautiful sign reading Blackburn Books, honoring her grandmother's maiden name. She was arranging her first shipment of books when a familiar voice called from the doorway. Miss O'Malley, I hear you're opening the finest bookshop in Denver. Lillian turned to find Lucas standing there, hat in hand, looking somewhat more polished than she remembered but with the same warm hazel eyes. Mr. Irving, you're earlier than expected. I finished my business in Silver Creek sooner than planned. He stepped inside, looking around appreciatively. "This is a fine establishment you're creating here." "It's just the beginning," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "I have so much more to do before the grand opening next month. I have no doubt it will be magnificent." He hesitated. "I was hoping. That is, I wondered if you might join me for dinner this evening to discuss your plans for the shop, of course," Lillian smiled. "I'd be delighted." That dinner was the first of many. Over the following weeks, as Lillian prepared her shop for opening, Lucas found reasons to extend his stay in Denver. He helped her install shelves, unpack books, and arrange the reading nook she had envisioned for children's story hours. They grew closer with each passing day. Lucas told her about his dreams for his ranch, how he hoped to expand it into one of the finest breeding operations in the territory. Lillian shared her vision for the bookshop becoming a cultural center for the growing city, hosting literary discussions and providing books for the new schools being established. On the evening before Blackburn Book's grand opening, Lucas invited Lillian to dinner at Denver's most elegant restaurant. She wore her finest dress, a deep burgundy silk that her mother had made for special occasions. "You look beautiful," Lucas said when he arrived to escort her. "Thank you." She took his offered arm. "I'm so nervous about tomorrow. What if no one comes? Then you'll have one very loyal customer who will buy enough books to keep you in business," he promised with a smile. The restaurant was lovely, with crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths. After they had ordered, Lucas seemed unusually serious. "Lillian, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "When I first saw you getting off that stagecoach in Silver Creek, I had no idea how much you would come to mean to me." He reached across the table and took her hand. "These past weeks have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she admitted softly. "I know it's soon, perhaps too soon, but I've never been more certain of anything." His eyes held her steadily. "I love you, Lillian O'Malley. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you stood up to your father in that courtroom, so brave and determined." Lillian's breath caught. "Lucas, I have to return to my ranch soon," he continued. "There's cattle to tend, decisions to make about the coming winter. But the thought of leaving you behind." He shook his head. "I don't want to be apart from you." "What are you saying?" Lucas drew a deep breath. "I'm asking if you might consider coming with me. Not right away, you have your shop to establish, and I wouldn't ask you to abandon that dream. But perhaps you might consider opening a second Blackburn Books in Buffalo next year. It's a growing town, and the nearest bookshop is 50 miles away." Lillian's mind whirled with possibilities. "You want me to come to Wyoming?" "Eventually, yes, but more than that." He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. "I want you to be my wife if you'll have me." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. Lillian gasped. "I know it's not as grand as you deserve," Lucas said apologetically. "But my heart comes with it, and a promise to love and honor you all the days of my life." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. 6 weeks ago, she had been fighting for her inheritance, uncertain of her future. Now here was this wonderful man offering her his heart, his name, his life. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Lucas, I will marry you." His face lit up with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand alone. "I love you, Lillian O'Malley," he said, raising her hand to his lips. "And I love you, Lucas Irving," she replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. They were married 2 months later in a small ceremony in Denver's finest church. Mr. Hollister traveled from Silver Creek to attend, as did several of Lillian's friends from Denver. Lucas's foreman and 2 ranch hands made the journey from Wyoming, bearing gifts and hearty congratulations. Blackburn Books thrived under Lillian's management. As Lucas had predicted, it quickly became a cultural hub for Denver's growing population. Lillian hired a capable assistant manager, a young widow named Clara who shared her passion for literature, allowing Lillian to divide her time between Denver and Lucas's ranch in Wyoming. The following spring, true to her word, Lillian opened a second Blackburn Books in Buffalo, Wyoming. The small but welcoming shop quickly became popular with the townspeople and the ranch families from the surrounding area. Lucas's ranch prospered as well. With Lillian's business acumen complementing his ranching knowledge, they expanded their operations, breeding some of the finest cattle in the territory. They built a new house on a hill overlooking the ranch, not grand, but comfortable and welcoming, with large windows and, at Lillian's insistence, bookshelves in every room. On their first anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson, Lucas presented Lillian with a package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, smiling as she unwrapped it. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the cover stamped with her initials. "I thought you might want to write our story," Lucas said. "How a brave bookshop owner and a simple cowboy found each other in a dusty frontier town." Lillian leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body. "It's a good story." "The best," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple, "and we're just getting started." 2 years later, Lillian gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Eleanor Margaret Irving, honoring both her grandmother and mother. The little girl had Lucas's hazel eyes and Lillian's determined spirit. When Eleanor was 3, a brother joined the family, Thomas Duncan Irving. Though Lillian had initially resisted using her father's name, Lucas had gently suggested that perhaps it was a way to reclaim it, to give it new meaning through their son. They never heard from Duncan O'Malley again, though occasionally rumors would reach them of a red-haired gambler working the saloons in Montana or Idaho. Lillian felt no regret at his absence from their lives. Her family was complete. As the years passed, both the ranch and the bookshops flourished. Lillian's inheritance had provided the foundation, but it was their hard work, determination, and love that built their success. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Lucas and Lillian returned to Silver Creek. The town had grown, with a railroad station now and several new businesses along the main street. They visited the courthouse where they had fought for her inheritance, now expanded with a new wing, and the park where they had sat discussing her case. "Did you ever imagine that day when you helped me with my trunk where we would end up?" Lillian asked as they walked arm in arm down the familiar street. Lucas smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "I knew you were special from the moment I saw you, but this..." He gestured to encompass everything, their life together, their children waiting back at the hotel with their nurse, their thriving businesses. "This is beyond anything I could have dreamed." Lillian stood on tiptoe to kiss him, not caring who might see. "Thank you for helping me fight for my inheritance," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for giving me the greatest inheritance of all," he replied, "your love." Hand in hand, they continued down the street, their shadows stretching long in the late afternoon sun, two people who had found each other against the odds, and built a life as vast and promising as the western sky above them.